It was towards the end of last week that the world hoped and the world watched as whether or not Benjamin Netanyahu could be reined in any way. Do you remember around a little under a week ago, there was even a suggestion that there might be some kind of ceasefire. Do you remember? And that filled some of us with a degree of hope. Well, someone clearly wasn't listening, and that's the Israeli Prime Minister, as they now move, as I said earlier, onto a third front. A war now with airstrikes on Houthi-controlled parts of Yemen, explosions rocking the Red Sea state, as Israel reportedly took revenge for missile attacks. Well, here's Israeli Defence Minister Yoav Gallant explaining why they felt the need to authorise those airstrikes.
We have no interest in expanding the war. We have no interest in looking for additional fronts. But if somebody attacks Israel, as the Houthis have recently done with missiles, and throughout the war with cruise missiles and drones, anyone who carries out such an attack, we will settle the account with them, and we know how to do it.
I referenced Prime Minister Netanyahu. We heard again from him yesterday, insisting his country had no choice but to launch these attacks on groups that target Israel with missiles of their own over the last few weeks and months.
Our enemies and our friends return to see Israel as it is, a strong, determined, powerful country. But I tell you, citizens of Israel, these are also challenging days, because even in these days, we should not forget that we are in the midst of a difficult war, the costs of which are heavy.
And overnight, multiple reports, including from Reuters, confirming an Israeli airstrike struck an apartment block in central Beirut for the first time in the conflict. 3 leaders of the militant group, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, were killed, according to the group. Lebanese officials say that almost 1 million people in the country have now been displaced as a result of the recent wave of Israeli airstrikes. This is a little of what Nasser Yazin, the Lebanese minister who's coordinating the country's emergency response, had to say last night about the situation.
This has become a complex emergency. What we've seen in few hours is unprecedented. The number of people displaced jumped from around 300,000 to almost 1 million, for those who are affected or being displaced. We opened hundreds of collective shelter, but we're still under a lot of strain. We are at the verge of coming to a catastrophic humanitarian situation if we don't act now.
Let's turn first to Dr. Elisabeth Kendall, who's head of Girton College at the University of Cambridge, an Arabist and Middle East expert. Well, Doctor, we've seen on other fronts, such as the Lebanon and Gaza, nothing but defiance. What is likely to be the reaction from the Houthis, do you imagine? Good morning to you.
Good morning. I think we can expect exactly the same reaction, defiance. Indeed, the Houthis had already put out several statements following the attacks on Lebanon by Israel, including the killing of Hezbollah leader Nasrallah, to say that they would be stepping up and declaring revenge. Now, of course, they are known for their bravado. They do follow up with their bravado, but I would imagine that behind the scenes, the Houthi leadership is also a little bit on edge and were probably taking measures to safeguard their leadership. If I were them and I'd just seen Israel going for Hamas in Gaza, then moving to the West Bank, then in very quick succession, decapitating the leadership of Hezbollah in Lebanon, I'd be thinking, maybe we're next. And indeed, that seems to be the case.
Can you divine what the end game is from Israel?
Well, I can't divine what the end game is. I think, though, it's very clear that Israel's on a roll and that thoughts of a ceasefire are out of the window. So, I mean, why are they on a roll? I think they have, over the past couple of months, pushed Iran's red lines quite significantly, particularly with the killing of the political leader of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh, inside Iran on the day of the presidential inauguration in Iran. That was at the very end of July. And they faced little retaliation. They've been pummeling Hamas in Gaza, destroying infrastructure, not that much pushback from the axis of resistance that has actually hurt Israel. And of course, we are just 1 month now before the US elections. Better for Israel to get this out of the way and dismantle Iran's axis of resistance. Neither the Trump nor the Harris administrations would want to inherit this level of aggression from an ally that it arms and funds, especially not with the need to focus on China and Russia and other issues.
You've almost anticipated my next question, because if you'll allow that the closest ally from the West is the US, I was going to ask you, what do you imagine the reaction is now from within the White House?
I imagine the reaction from the White House will be to call for peace, as usual, to decry the killing of any civilians, to say that everyone has the right to defend themselves. It will be same old. But once we get beyond this election, I think neither of the new administrations will want to be tainted with this. I think there might also be one other aspect in play here, which is that the axis of resistance and many of these militant armed groups absolutely love anniversaries. And of course, we are just 1 week away from the 1-year anniversary of the October the 7th attacks by Hamas. So it could be that Israel has been taking preemptive action to avoid some kind of spectacular reenactment.
That's an interesting thought. Doctor, thank you. Elisabeth Kendall, you're head of Girton College at the University of Cambridge and you're an Arab and Middle East expert. Listening Emily Schrader, who's joining us from Tel Aviv, an American-Israeli journalist focusing on Israel and Iranian relations. The headlines in the country you're in, how are they portraying this, if you will, third front offensive? Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me. I think it's pretty clear that the Israeli government, as well as the media, is pretty pleased with the assassination of Hezbollah terrorist leader Nasrallah. And in addition to that, numerous other Hezbollah leaders and now PFLP leaders as well. Israel is on a roll, kind of as you mentioned before, but I do want to clarify one thing. It's not just a third front. We're actually dealing with 7 fronts. We've been dealing with that since October 8th when Hezbollah started attacking Israel. So this isn't really something new that we're dealing with right now. It's an ongoing front. In addition to the Houthis have been firing drones and rockets at the state of Israel for many, many months. It isn't a new activity. And we actually have other fronts as well. We've had drones come in from Iraq. We've had a direct attack from the Islamic Republic of Iran. So these aren't really new phenomenons that we're seeing right now.
You describe it as being on a roll, Emily. Where does the roll end? What does a peace or cessation look like?
Well, I think on the northern border, a peace or cessation looks like pushing back Hezbollah past the Litani River. This is something that isn't a new proposal from Israel, by the way. This is something that is what it should be under international law, UN Resolution 1701. That's something that the UN and the international community has not enforced to their own detriment and now to Israel's detriment. And I think Israel is finally saying, you know what, if you're going to allow 250,000 ballistic missiles and rockets to build up on our border, we're not going to allow that because it endangers our citizens that have been displaced in the tens of thousands from that northern border in Israel for 11 months and counting.
But the Yemen, what does an end game look like there, Emily?
I think when it comes to any of the proxies of the Islamic Republic of Iran, who's the real enemy here, when we're talking about Yemen, it's not the country of Yemen that we have a problem with. It's the Houthi terrorists, again, a proxy of the Islamic Republic. And I don't think we're going to see an end to any of these conflicts until we see the Islamic Republic of Iran effectively deterred. What does that look like? There are a number of different options, not necessarily war. I hope we can avoid an escalation into a full-out war. However, these terrorist proxies of the regime in Iran, taking their direction as well as funds and weapons from the Islamic Republic, they are the ones who need to stop firing on the state of Israel. It isn't Israel who launched operations against the Houthis to start. It's the Houthis who launched operations against the state of Israel. And the same thing goes for Hezbollah. Over 8,000 projectiles, ballistic missiles, suicide drones have been fired at Israeli civilian targets since October 8th.
Okay. Lastly, how popular is Prime Minister Netanyahu at this time?
I think the popularity of Netanyahu has definitely skyrocketed since the assassination of Nasrallah. And I expect that will continue as long as Israel is succeeding in the war. This is despite the fact that, for 11 months and counting, he's been wildly unpopular. Of course, still a very divisive figure in the state of Israel, but definitely his popularity is rising as a result of these military successes.
Thanks for your time this morning, Emily. Emily Schrader, American-Israeli journalist, joining us from Tel Aviv. Around a week ago, they were urging caution and ceasefire. This is the reaction from Israel on 3 fronts. We'll take your views on